Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. The Traveling Circus Scary Story, published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. Arrival. The rusted husk of a car, its hood gaping like a forgotten scream, marked the town's entrance. Dust devils pirouetted on the cracked asphalt, the only movement in a landscape choked by a heavy silence. John Carter steered his sputtering Ford through the desolate main street, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. This wasn't the fresh start he'd envisioned. Despair hung as thick as the dust in the air, clinging to the boarded-up windows and peeling paint of the few remaining buildings. "This it?" Sarah, his 17-year-old daughter, asked, her voice laced with a skepticism that mirrored his own. But unlike John, a spark of morbid curiosity flickered in her dark eyes. Mary, ever the optimist, forced a smile. "Fresh start, remember?" she said, her gaze tracing the bleak landscape. "Quiet, definitely, but a break from all that you know." John knew. The painful memories of their old life were a constant weight, pushing them from place to place like tumbleweeds in a storm. This forgotten town, nestled amidst a sprawl of barren fields, seemed an unlikely haven. Billy, Sarah's 12-year-old brother, remained silent, his nose buried in a dog-eared copy of Edgar Allan Poe. Unlike Sarah's outward curiosity, Billy's dark eyes held a quiet apprehension. Then, on the horizon, a splash of color pierced the monotony. A Ferris wheel, its spokes adorned with flickering bulbs like skeletal fingers, dominated the skyline. Below it sprawled a maze of colorful tents, each emblazoned with fantastical creatures that seemed to writhe and twist in the fading light. "The Circus of Dreams," Mary read aloud from a faded flyer that had fluttered into the car earlier. "The Circus of Dreams," a strangely discordant name for such a desolate place, John thought, a shiver running down his spine. As they drew closer, the silence gave way to a cacophony of sound, a discordant blend of haunting laughter and a calliope melody that seemed to wheeze and groan rather than sing. The wind, carrying a strange chill, whispered through the dusty streets, brushing John's ear with words that seemed both familiar and utterly alien. Sarah, however, seemed to thrive on the unsettling atmosphere. A thrill danced in her eyes, replacing the usual sullenness that had settled since their flight. "Let's go," she exclaimed, already halfway to the carnival's entrance, a gaudily painted monstrosity fashioned to resemble a giant clown's head with a toothy, mocking grin. John hesitated, his gaze lingering on the flickering lights. He could have sworn he saw a shadowy figure dart between the tents, but when he blinked, it was gone. Maybe just his imagination, he thought, but the unease wouldn't leave him. Mary tugged at his sleeve, a worried crease forming between her brows. "John, you coming?" With a sigh, John forced a smile. "Just needed a closer look," he mumbled, following his family towards the beckoning lights of the Circus of Dreams. An inexplicable dread settled in his gut, a feeling he couldn't shake. This wasn't just a circus. This place felt wrong. The vibrant colors seemed to mask something sinister, a darkness that promised not dreams, but nightmares. Chapter 2. Laughter with a Hidden Edge. John stepped through the gaping maw of the clown's head, the stench of popcorn and grease hitting him like a wave. Inside, a kaleidoscope of colors assaulted his senses. Dazzling lights cast dancing shadows on a throng of cheering spectators. Acrobats soared through the air, their gravity-defying feats met with gasps and applause. Sarah, already lost in the spectacle, weaved through the crowd, drawn like a moth to a flame. Billy, however, clutched Mary's hand, his eyes wide with a fear that went beyond the usual excitement of a circus. He tugged at her sleeve, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom, I don't like it here." Mary knelt beside him, her brow furrowed in concern. "What's wrong, honey?" "It feels bad," Billy mumbled, his gaze darting nervously at the towering figures looming overhead. "Like something's watching us." John looked around, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, a similar unease gnawed at him. The smiles on the faces of the crowd seemed strained, their laughter a hollow echo beneath the booming voice of the ringmaster. He noticed whispers traveling through the throng, hushed conversations punctuated by worried glances towards the back of the tent. Suddenly, the spotlight shifted and a figure strode into the center ring. A tall, gaunt man with a shock of white hair plastered to his scalp, his face painted with a grotesque clown smile. "Alistair," the ringmaster announced. Alistair's eyes, however, didn't match the smile. They were cold, calculating, and held a flicker of something dark and predatory. As he spoke, his voice, honeyed and smooth, sent shivers down John's spine. The act that followed was a grotesque display of contortionism. Alistair's body twisted into impossibly inhuman shapes, his bones seeming to bend at unnatural angles. The crowd gasped in a mixture of awe and revulsion. Sarah, however, seemed mesmerized, her eyes glued to the stage. John watched, a growing suspicion forming in his gut. There was something off about Alistair's performance. His movements were too fluid, too effortless. It felt more like a demonstration of dark magic than human flexibility. Then, in a final twist, Alistair contorted himself into a human pretzel, his body forming a cage around a caged bird. The laughter died down, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. The bird, a vibrant macaw, fluttered against the bars, its frantic shrieks echoing in the vast tent. With a sickening snap, Alistair straightened, the bird now limp in his grasp. A cruel smile stretched across his face. "And now for the grand finale," he boomed, his voice dripping with a sadistic glee. He raised the lifeless bird high above his head, its bright plumage a stark contrast to his blood-stained gloves. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Mary clutched Billy tighter, her face pale. Suddenly, a loud crash erupted from the back of the tent. A panicked scream followed, then silence. The unsettling atmosphere thickened, the air heavy with anticipation. Alistair, however, seemed unfazed. He tossed the bird aside with a nonchalant flick of his wrist, his cold gaze sweeping over the stunned audience. "Ignore the interruption, folks. The show must go on," he declared, a manic glint in his eyes. John felt a cold sweat prickle his skin. This wasn't a show anymore. It was a chilling performance, with a hidden, sinister undercurrent. And for the first time, he truly understood Billy's fear. They were trapped within a nightmare, and the circus of dreams held something far more horrifying than dazzling acrobatics and grotesque contortions. Chapter 3: Shadows and Secrets. The panicked scream hung in the air long after the crash, a chilling echo in the sudden silence that followed Alistair's unsettling performance. Unease gnawed at John, a feeling that transcended the initial shock. This wasn't just a poorly timed technical difficulty. It was a glimpse behind the dazzling facade, a hint of something sinister lurking beneath the surface. Mary, her face pale with worry, gripped Billy's hand tighter. "We should leave," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Before John could respond, Sarah, her eyes alight with a morbid curiosity, pushed through the crowd towards the source of the commotion. "Sarah, wait," John called out, but his daughter was already gone. John exchanged a worried glance with Mary. He knew Sarah's rebellious streak, but this was different. This was a darkness that chilled him to the bone. Leaving Mary with Billy, John followed Sarah, weaving through the throng of bewildered spectators. He finally found her at the back of the tent, peering through a makeshift curtain. Beyond, shadows danced in the flickering light of a single lantern. John pushed aside the curtain, a wave of stale air and the musky smell of incense washing over him. The scene that greeted him was a stark contrast to the vibrant spectacle outside. This was a hidden tent, a sanctum of the macabre. Dusty tarot cards lay scattered on a crimson velvet cloth. A crystal ball gleamed in the dim light, and an assortment of animal bones and dried herbs filled the air with a pungent aroma. And in the center of it all, a woman sat on a low stool, her face shrouded in the shadows. Esmeralda, Sarah breathed, a hint of awe in her voice. The fortune teller, a figure shrouded in whispers and legends within the circus, was finally before them. Esmeralda's head snapped up, and John gasped. Her eyes, the color of polished obsidian, seemed to pierce through the darkness, locking onto his gaze. A knowing smile played upon her lips, etched with lines that spoke of a life lived at the fringes of society, privy to secrets both beautiful and horrifying. "You shouldn't be here, child," Esmeralda rasped, her voice a dry whisper. "This place is not for the curious." Before Sarah could retort, John stepped forward. What happened here? What was that scream? Esmeralda's gaze flickered towards the back of the tent, where shadows seemed to dance and writhe. "An unfortunate accident," she said cryptically, "a reminder of the price one pays for delving into forbidden things." John's unease deepened. This was no accident. This was something far more sinister. Yet, his fear was overshadowed by a growing concern for Sarah, her curiosity bordering on recklessness. "We should go," John insisted, his voice tight. "This place is unsafe." But Sarah's eyes were fixed on Esmeralda. "What do you mean, forbidden things?" She pressed, a thrill of danger lacing her voice. Esmeralda sighed, a deep rasping sound that echoed within the confines of the tent. "This circus," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "holds a darkness within its heart. A malevolent entity, trapped for centuries, feeding off the fears and despair of those who enter. You sense it, don't you?" She turned to John, her eyes holding a chilling intensity. "You all do." Meanwhile, Billy, unable to shake off the unsettling feeling from the performance, wandered away from Mary. Drawn by a morbid fascination, he found himself at the entrance of the funhouse, its distorted reflections beckoning him closer. Inside, the air hung heavy with dust and the smell of stale popcorn. Twisted mirrors stretched and warped his image, creating grotesque caricatures of himself. Billy, his heart hammering in his chest, pushed deeper, a sense of dread tightening its grip around him. Suddenly, a shadowy figure flickered on the periphery of his vision. Turning a corner, Billy found himself in a hall of mirrors, each reflecting the same unsettling silhouette. He was being watched. Panic surged through him as the figure stepped into the nearest mirror, its dark form solidifying within the reflective surface. It was tall and gaunt, its features blurred yet somehow familiar. Billy screamed, a high-pitched sound that echoed through the funhouse, shattering the eerie silence. Outside the big top, John, shaken by Esmeralda's words, felt a surge of panic as Billy's scream ripped through the air. The darkness within the circus was no longer just a feeling. It was a tangible presence, closing in on them. Chapter 4: Cracks in the Facade. Billy's scream echoed through the carnival grounds, a chilling counterpoint to the distant calliope music. John bolted towards the source, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Leaving Mary to deal with the bewildered onlookers, he navigated the maze of tense and twisted pathways, his heart pounding with a primal fear. He found Billy huddled in a corner of the funhouse, tears streaming down his pale face. The boy trembled, his eyes wide with terror, unable to form a coherent sentence. John scooped him up in a tight embrace, his anger momentarily overshadowed by relief. Outside, Mary paced anxiously, her face etched with worry. As John emerged, Billy clinging to him, the dam broke. "This place is evil, John. We need to get out of here," she exclaimed, her voice laced with desperation. John simply nodded, the fear in Billy's eyes mirroring his own growing terror. Esmeralda's words echoed in his mind, a chilling confirmation of his worst suspicions. Yet, a part of him recoiled at the thought of leaving. They had nowhere else to go. This dilapidated town, for all its desolation, was their only refuge. The next few days were a blur. Sarah, seemingly unaffected by Billy's breakdown, became consumed with a morbid fascination for the circus's secrets. She spent hours exploring the grounds, disappearing into hidden corners, and returning with cryptic knowledge gleaned from whispered conversations and overheard snippets. She became withdrawn, her bright green eyes filled with a newfound intensity that chilled John to the bone. Mealtimes were strained affairs, punctuated by Sarah's pronouncements about the circus's history and the darkness that lurked beneath its vibrant facade. John and Mary exchanged worried glances, a chasm opening between them and their daughter. They were losing Sarah, piece by piece, to the malevolent influence of the Circus of Dreams. Billy, meanwhile, retreated into his own world of nightmares. His once vibrant artwork morphed into grotesque depictions of shadowed figures and twisted landscapes. The paper screamed with silent terror. Mary tried to soothe him, to offer a semblance of normalcy, but his dark eyes seemed to see something beyond this world, something utterly chilling. One evening, as John sat outside their ramshackle motel room, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, Alistair, the unsettling clown, materialized from the shadows. John's skin prickled with unease as the twisted smile spread across Alistair's face. "Troubled, are we?" Alistair crooned, his voice a honeyed drawl that sent shivers down John's spine. "Family secrets have a way of unraveling, don't they?" John's grip tightened on the coffee mug. "What do you know about us?" he demanded, his voice tight with suspicion. Alistair tilted his head, his eyes gleaming with an unnatural light. "More than you'd like, Mr. Carter," he said, his voice dripping with a chilling familiarity. "And let's be honest, your past isn't exactly spotless, is it? The Circus of Dreams has a way of finding one's vulnerabilities, exploiting them for its own amusement." John felt a cold dread grip him. Alistair's words were a direct hit, a reference to the past that had driven them from their previous life. Clown leaned closer, his smile widening into a grotesque caricature. "Perhaps," he continued, his voice a seductive whisper, "the circus can offer you a solution. A fresh start, free from the burden of your mistakes." John recoiled, his blood turning to ice. Alistair was playing a dangerous game, dangling the promise of salvation while hinting at a deeper, more sinister motive. As quickly as he appeared, Alistair vanished back into the shadows, leaving John with a sickening sense of dread and the chilling realization that their fight for survival had just begun. The secrets they held, the darkness they carried within, were no match for the malevolent power that held them captive in this twisted carnival of nightmares. Chapter 5. Unveiling the Nightmare. John's encounter with Alistair left a suffocating weight on his chest. Clown's cryptic words gnawed at him, twisting his already frayed nerves into a knot of fear. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a constant vigil, a desperate need to protect his family from the encroaching darkness. Sarah, however, seemed oblivious to the danger. Driven by an insatiable curiosity that bordered on obsession, she spent her days haunting the fringes of the circus grounds, her eyes searching for a hidden entrance, a forbidden truth. One moonless night, fueled by a potent mix of fear and morbid fascination, Sarah snuck past the sleeping guards and towards Madame Fortuna's imposing caravan. Its ornate exterior, once alluring, now held a sinister air. With a pounding heart, Sarah picked the lock, forcing open the creaking door. A wave of stale air, thick with incense and the cloying scent of decay, washed over her. Inside, the caravan was a labyrinth of velvet drapes and flickering candles. Sarah, her senses on high alert, navigated the twisting passageways, her hand trailing along the dusty walls. Then, a hidden door, cleverly disguised as a bookcase, revealed itself. Sarah, her breath catching in her throat, pushed it open. A wave of nausea washed over her as she stepped into the chamber. The room was a macabre tableau. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Animal skulls adorned makeshift altars, their empty sockets seeming to stare into her soul. In the center, a heavy tome lay open, its pages filled with arcane symbols and disturbing illustrations. As Sarah inched closer, her fingers brushed against a cold, metallic object. It was a ceremonial dagger, its blade stained a dark red. Bile rose in her throat. This was no longer a circus. This was a place of darkness, fueled by something far more horrifying than mere theatrics. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind her. Sarah whirled around, her heart hammering against her ribs. A tall figure, shrouded in shadow, stood at the entrance. Fear choked her scream as she recognized the menacing glint of Madame Fortuna's diamond-encrusted monocle. Meanwhile, back in the motel room, John and Mary paced frantically. Sarah's disappearance had thrown them into a vortex of worry. They knew something was terribly wrong. Remembering Esmeralda's cryptic warnings, John decided they needed help. With a sliver of hope, they ventured back to the fortune-teller's hidden tent. "She is in danger," Esmeralda rasped, her eyes gleaming with an uncanny knowledge. Madame Fortuna feeds on fear. She preys on the darkness within, twisting it for her own nefarious purposes. Esmeralda went on to explain the circus's dark history. Madame Fortuna, a powerful sorceress with a hunger for immortality, used the circus as a conduit, drawing upon the fears and despair of its patrons to fuel her own dark magic. Every tragic accident, every scream in the night fueled her twisted rituals. Billy, who'd been plagued by nightmares intensifying with each passing night, woke from a particularly vivid one, a scream tearing from his throat. Driven by a compulsion he couldn't explain, he stumbled out of the motel room and towards the source of the chill that had gripped him since their arrival. His steps led him to the ominous silhouette of Madame Fortuna's caravan. He peeked through a crack in the door, his blood running cold at the sight that unfolded before him. Madame Fortuna, her face contorted in a grotesque mask of power, chanted in a language that scraped against his sanity. Her form shifted and warped, morphing into a terrifying amalgam of human and beast, her eyes glowing with malevolent power. The sight triggered a wave of nausea and primal fear. It was the culmination of all his nightmares, brought to horrifying life. Billy cried out, his scream lost amidst the cacophony of the chanting and the unnatural energy that crackled in the air. Now, Sarah wasn't just facing a dark secret. She was trapped in the heart of a nightmare, and the terrifying truth about the circus of dreams had been unveiled in all its horrifying glory. Chapter 6: A Carnival Nightmares. Billy's scream echoed through the night, a raw, primal sound that tore through Sarah's terror. She spun around, a jolt of adrenaline coursing through her veins. Madame Fortuna, her back momentarily turned, offered a glimpse of her true form, a monstrous visage with glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws. As if sensing Sarah's presence, Madame Fortuna whipped around, her face twisting into a predatory snarl. So, the curious child finally stumbles upon the truth, she rasped. But truth can be a dangerous plaything. Sarah backed away, a desperate plea forming on her lips, but the words died in her throat as she locked eyes with the monstrous figure before her. In that instant, fear turned to a chilling realization: the circus of dreams wasn't a circus. It was a feeding ground, and Madame Fortuna was the predator. A booming voice shattered the tense silence. John and Mary, alerted by Billy's scream, burst into the chamber, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and determination. "Leave her alone," John roared, charging towards the sorceress. Madame Fortuna let out a mocking laugh, a sound that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. "Such valiant heroes," she sneered. "But fear is a powerful weapon, and you each have plenty to offer." With a flick of her wrist, the chamber pulsed with dark energy. The air grew thick and oppressive, the shadows writhing and twisting like living things. Fear, raw and primal, surged through Sarah, whispering insidious doubts and chilling memories. John's hands trembled, his past mistakes swirling before his eyes, threatening to drown him in guilt and regret. Mary, however, stood her ground, her voice unwavering. "Don't listen to her. This is her game, feeding off your fears." But even Mary's voice struggled to pierce the thick veil of terror that hung heavy in the air. Suddenly, the room dissolved into a cacophony of nightmares. A monstrous spider, mirroring John's deepest arachnophobia, scuttled towards him, its mandibles clicking ominously. Sarah found herself surrounded by faceless figures, their accusing whispers echoing her darkest secrets. Billy, separated from his family in the chaos, stumbled upon a twisted reflection of his own artwork, a nightmarish carnival populated by grotesque figures with his own face. The once vibrant tents of the circus of dreams now pulsed with a dark, malevolent energy. Grotesque figures materialized from the shadows, their laughter a chilling soundtrack to the unfolding pandemonium. It was a carnival of nightmares made flesh, each manifestation a weapon wielded by Madame Fortuna to exploit their deepest fears. John and Mary fought their way through the nightmarish landscape, desperately searching for Billy and Sarah. Yet, fate seemed determined to keep them separated, twisting the familiar paths of the circus into a labyrinth of terror. In this chaotic realm, fear became a tangible entity, a suffocating presence that threatened to consume them whole. The Carters' fight for survival wasn't just against Madame Fortuna and her dark magic. It was a battle against themselves, against the crippling fear that threatened to tear them apart and deliver them right into the clutches of the sorceress. As the circus became a twisted reflection of their worst fears, the stakes had never been higher. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred, and the Carters were trapped in a desperate struggle for their sanity, and maybe, just maybe, their lives. Chapter 7: Choices and Sacrifices. John pushed through a warped funhouse mirror, his reflection contorted into a grotesque caricature of himself. Claws, not fingernails, raked his distorted face. His deepest fear, the one he'd kept buried for years, materialized before him, a monstrous spider, its hairy legs dripping with venomous goo. Panic surged through him, threatening to overwhelm. But a strangled cry from Mary, somewhere beyond the twisted reflections, snapped him back to reality. He couldn't succumb to fear, not now. Mary, her face pale and drawn, wrestled with a phantasmagoric version of Sarah, a twisted reflection that screamed accusations and taunted her with visions of familial failure. Tears streamed down Mary's face, but her voice remained steady as she fought back the darkness threatening to consume her. Meanwhile, Sarah found herself trapped in a hall of mirrors. But these mirrors didn't reflect her own image. Instead, they displayed fragments of her family's past, John's strained relationship with his father, Mary's struggle with a long-ago illness, Billy's isolation and fear. Madame Fortuna's voice, dripping with seductive power, echoed through the twisted hall. "Embrace it, child." It slithered into Sarah's ear. "Let their pain become yours. Become stronger. Feel the power course through you." The darkness whispered promises of control, of finally feeling like she belonged. A horrifying choice loomed before her: succumb to the darkness and gain power, or resist and risk losing her family to the machinations of a sadistic sorceress. On the periphery of the carnival, Billy stumbled upon a forgotten corner. Here, the shadows coalesced into a menacing figure, its features obscured by darkness. Yet, Billy felt an unsettling familiarity in its gaze. As he backed away, the figure solidified. It was a composite being, a chilling amalgamation of every tortured soul who had perished under Madame Fortuna's control. The collective sorrow and rage of these lost souls radiated from the entity, threatening to engulf Billy in its despair. Yet, amidst the darkness, a spark of defiance flickered the fading echoes of their hope, their struggle against their tormentor. Billy, though small and terrified, stood his ground, clenched his fists, fueled by a sudden surge of courage for his family, for the innocent souls trapped within the figure before him. Chapter 8, Whispers in the Ashes. John, fueled by a primal urge to protect his family, roared and lunged at the monstrous spider. The creature reared back, its fangs dripping venom. In that split second, the distorted reflections in the funhouse shimmered, and John saw not the spider, but his estranged father, his face contorted in rage. A wave of guilt and regret washed over him, momentarily paralyzing him. But then, Mary's voice, sharp and clear, sliced through the haze of fear. "John, look past it. It's not real." With a Herculean effort, John tore his gaze from the spectral figure and slammed a makeshift torch he'd snatched from a nearby stall into the spider's gaping maw. The creature screeched, a sound that echoed through the warped hall and dissolved into a plume of black smoke. Meanwhile, Sarah, locked in a desperate battle within the Hall of Mirrors, faced a different kind of monster. The whispers, once seductive, now turned vicious, tearing at her sense of self-worth and loyalty. She saw glimpses of a future where she reveled in power, where her family was an afterthought. But then, a flicker of warmth cut through the darkness. A memory of Billy, his trusting eyes filled with love. She slammed her fist against the nearest mirror, shattering the twisted reflections. The whispers faltered, replaced by a deafening silence. On the outskirts of the circus, Billy faced the embodiment of the circus's past victims. The figure, a cacophony of sorrow and rage, lashed out with inky tendrils that threatened to engulf him. But Billy, fueled by a newfound courage, stood his ground. He reached out, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. "You're not alone," he whispered, his voice surprisingly steady. "We all carry the scars, but we don't have to be defined by them." As if struck by a bolt of lightning, the figure wavered. The whispers of despair morphed into a chorus of hesitant hope. The tendrils retracted, replaced by a shimmering light that enveloped Billy. The entity dissolved, leaving behind a single, vibrant feather pulsating with an ethereal glow. The carnival lights flickered and died, plunging the grounds into darkness. A deafening crack echoed through the night as the main tent collapsed inwards. Screams ripped through the air as the distorted reality of the circus of dreams crumbled. John and Mary stumbled out of the funhouse, coughing and disoriented. They found Sarah, pale but resolute, standing amidst the wreckage. Billy, clutching the feather, ran into their arms, his small frame trembling. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky a pale orange, they stood amidst the smoldering ruins of the Circus of Dreams. The silence was heavy, laden with the weight of what they'd endured. John held Mary close, his heart heavy with a loss he couldn't articulate. The experience had taken its toll. There were scars, both physical and emotional, that would forever mark them. Billy, sensing their grief, clutched the feather tightly. But then, with a trembling hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sketch pad. With a newfound determination in his eyes, he began to draw. The first lines were shaky, but they formed the image of a single, defiant butterfly emerging from a chrysalis. A fragile symbol of hope amidst the ashes. The true nature of the evil they'd faced remained a mystery. Was it Madame Fortuna's dark magic, or something more ancient and sinister, embedded within the very fabric of the circus itself? No answer came, only a chilling silence and the skeletal remains of the carnival on the outskirts of town, a silent testament to the darkness it once held. The Carters left, carrying the weight of their ordeal. They were forever marked by the horrors they'd witnessed, but they also carried a newfound resilience, a bond forged in the fires of fear. And perhaps, just perhaps, Billy's hopeful sketch held a sliver of truth that even in the darkest of places, a spark of hope could flicker and endure.